So yeah, the cost of not acting, the risk of allowing another October the 7th to happen in the south, or much larger version orchestrated in the north by Hezbollah, it suddenly became infinitely higher than diplomatic and human costs of acting. And at the end of the day, the status quo was no longer survivable.
Yeah, and this tragic reality. I mean, this is what I saw a while ago, and it just kind of made sense to me one day driving to work. We're going to talk about the asymmetric strategy because that's the actual name for what I was thinking of. And so it's a deliberate, it's actually brilliant, like in a dark way. It's a strategy used by Hamas and Hezbollah, and to be honest, the leaders of Iran, the resistance axis. And they don't fight conventional wars. They actually use Israel's immense military strength and its adherence to Western legal frameworks. Actually uses that against them. It's like a Chinese finger trap. Have you seen one of those?
It sounds horrible.
Like the harder you pull, the tighter it gets, and you only get free by kind of changing how you move your fingers. Coming back to this, let's walk through how that feedback loop actually works. So we have step one. The proxy group deliberately provokes Israel. So they fire a barrage of unguided rockets into Israeli cities, or as we've seen, they launch a cross-border raid. That is terrifying. That's step one. Step two, Israel, operating on its strict doctrine of punitive deterrence. Strongman, you know, we are the military might here. The belief that projecting weakness invites a war of annihilation. So respond with overwhelming military force. Let's punish the group and let's re-establish the red lines. Because if they don't respond overwhelmingly, the attacks are just going to keep coming. But here is step three. And this is the most sinister one, because these proxy groups intentionally embed their military assets, their command centres, their rocket launchers, their tunnel networks. They embed them and have been embedding them for years because of the Hudnot. I don't know what the plural for that is. Deeply within civilian infrastructure. Like we've seen, definitely hospitals. You know, every time you look on the news, no, it's not, no, it's not, no, it's not. Time moves on, they go in. Yes, it is, yes, it is, yes, it is. Schools, apartment blocks. Israel's overwhelming military response inevitably and unavoidably is going to cause massive civilian suffering and horrific destruction, which is exactly what the proxy group wants. So they're playing into their hands, really.
And step four, that civilian suffering, it's captured on smartphones, isn't it? It's broadcast globally on social media, on the Western news networks. And that triggers international outrage, like political, diplomatic, social. And it puts pressure on Israel on many, many angles. And the UN convenes, allies threaten to withhold weapons, college campuses erupt in protests, and the world demands that Israel stop. And then we reach the final step. The international community ties Israel's hands, and it forces a ceasefire before the proxy group is destroyed.
So the proxy group, Hamas, say, they emerge from the rubble. And again, we don't know what's happening in Hamas at the moment. Apparently they're still alive. Apparently they're still there. But their cities are destroyed. Thousands of their people are dead. But the leadership survives. And so does the rhetoric, so does the mindset, so does the intention, so does the holy war. And because they survived the onslaught of one of the most powerful militaries in the world, they can claim this massive political and theological, because we're talking into this narrative here, victory. And then on top of that, you got the, sorry to say it, but the bleeding hearts of the West, who funnel money back into the place for redevelopment, and some of which has pretty high chance of getting in their rearming phase. And look, sorry, I know bleeding hearts it sounds a bit harsh, but I actually count myself in with it. I am actually quite left-wing at heart. I care about people. I want peace, and I want to help. But I can also see where that compassion is being used. And I don't like being used. And I feel like we don't see this. I don't think maybe it's that blindness we're talking about. We're not even looking for it. So that's why we don't see it. My experience with being in this neighbourhood is someone gives you a cup of tea doesn't mean they're your best friend. It's that kind of, they've done a narrative that is a victorious one. And then we go and help them rearm, basically. If you're up against one of the most advanced militaries in the world, you're not going to win head on. So these are the other ways they're finding to do it. And hey, I'm not endorsing it, but I'm just saying it is pretty damn clever. I can see it. I would do it if I was in that situation myself. I think this is part of what we need to be able to do, is to get into the heads of that mindset. And that's what this is all about. And just see it for what it is, so we can dig down to see the why. But that's incredibly dark. The conclusion that they don't have to defeat Israel on the battlefield. They know they can't match their planes, their F-35s. They can't match the tanks they've got. They just have to survive the Israeli offensive. They just need to watch the international community's moral outrage, stop the clock, and then they win.
They shift the battlefield from miniature reality, don't they, to global perception. And all the while, the patron state, Iran, sits back perfectly safe. They watch their proxies bleed Israel financially, drain their diplomatic goodwill, and exhaust their military. And all along, Iran itself is avoiding direct conventional war. It's really a strategy more of controlled instability. As you say, yeah, it works brilliantly. And this overwhelming feeling of being structurally stuck with absolutely no good options is perfectly illustrated by even another massive issue in Israel, the West Bank dilemma.
We hear so much in the news about the West Bank. And actually, we got told off for calling it that in Israel multiple times. And we didn't understand at the time, because that's the language that we use. We hear it all the time on the news. Basically, it's quite an antiquated political term from when Jordan occupied the area in 1967. We were told, like, this is the answer from the Israelis as to why they got so hot about using the West Bank. So a lot of Israelis will call it Judea and Samaria. Now, this goes quite deep, actually, because Judea and Samaria ties back to the older biblical names. And even that links into a bigger pattern going all the way back to the Romans of renaming places. And in a sense, what they were doing when they renamed places, the Romans renamed places, they were masking the Jewish connection to the land. So we're going to use West Bank because it's just quicker for explaining, and it stops people having translation problems in their head. But yeah, that's just something that came up as we were in Israel, and it's interesting to put this across since we're talking about it. But anyway, the point is, we hear about the military occupation and the settlements all the time. But the historical context and the actual strategic maths behind it is almost always completely lost in the soundbites. If we want to understand why Israel acts the way it does in the West Bank, again, we have to rewind to 1967. So in the 6-day war after being attacked, Israel captured the West Bank from Jordan, and they captured Gaza from Egypt. And it often gets glossed over. They didn't capture an independent, sovereign Palestinian state. And more on that name Palestinian later if we get time. They captured land that was previously governed and occupied by other Arab nations during a defensive war. So we just want to make sure that doesn't get glossed over. And it lends to the idea that the West Bank is a political term that is kind of out of date in terms of the reality of what actually happened in history. So, where was I? let's fast forward to get to today. So if holding this territory causes so much international grief and internal moral conflict, why hasn't Israel just annexed the West Bank entirely or completely withdrawn from it? So they're in middle ground at the moment. They've got a military arrangement there, but it is apportioned for the Palestinians to be there. I'm not going to go into that because that could go into another whole rabbit hole as to what this military situation is. But anyway, because in the Israeli calculus, both withdrawing from it or annexing it, both of those clean, simple options, they both present absolute existential threats to Israel, to the Israeli state. So let's look into them. Option 1, the total withdrawal. What does that look like? Well, if Israel pulls its military out completely, if it dismantles the settlements, we had some conversations. It's such a big conversation, we're not going to do it here. But anyway, if they do that, like they did in Gaza, they come out, they dismantle the settlements, and they hand over control. What they fear is the immediate creation of a massive and uncontainable security vacuum. And the difference with the West Bank, let's call it that, and Gaza is that it's right next to their major population centres. And it's in the centre of their country. It actually has an advantage, a strategic advantage, as it being on like a higher elevation. So they look at the precedent, and you look at what happened when they withdrew from Gaza. As we said, in 2005, they left. And within a couple of years, Hamas violently took over and turned it into this heavily fortified weapon, kilometres big weapon, like a rocket launching pad, like the tunnel networks, let alone the social weapon that they were building, the negative propaganda weapon that they knew would ensue if Israel ever tried to defend themselves. Part of the mathematics they're using. So if that happens in the West Bank, the geography is actually terrifying. As we said, it overlooks the central coastal plain, where 70% of Israel's population lives. It overlooks Ben Gurion Airport. It's very, very close, I didn't realise. So if a hostile proxy group sets up mortars and rocket in the hills of the West Bank, they can completely shut down the entire Israeli economy on day one. So total withdrawal is national suicide.
If you can't leave, what's option 2? To annex it entirely, to just declare it fully part of Israel. But it's because of demographics. The maths of that is absolutely brutal. There are millions of Palestinians living in the West Bank.
I don't want to stop the flow, but I just feel it's a good point as we're talking about the West Bank or Judea and Samaria. I think we need to talk about this name, Palestinian, because that's something that was pushed back on quite a lot. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. While we're at it, let's go into it. So, do you want to carry on?
Yeah. Okay. So Palestinian is a name that many Israelis push back on, and you've got to get into the mindset when you hear the pushback on names like Palestinian or West Bank or whatever. Because from an Israeli perspective, this isn't just semantics, this is part of the fight. Not missiles and guns, but language is part of the fight. Language is a weapon. And so they see the term itself as weaponized. Actually, it's been hugely effective in shaping global perception. And it started as Israel was becoming well, we'll talk about it in a sec. It's driving anti-Israel sentiment all around the world. You say that word and it's already weighted in your soul. Yeah, we won't be able to dig deep into that, but wow, we've uncovered a deep history on Palestinians and things. Anyway, we won't go into it too much, but I'll continue on. Basically, from that viewpoint, the identity behind the name. The argument is Palestinian refers to Arab populations who lived in the area that Britain called Palestine. But that distinct national identity only really took shape in the 20th century, especially after the Six-Day War. But it was largely in opposition to Israel being there, Israel rising up. So, yeah, it's a relatively new national identity. The early days of the 20th century, national identities were being born all over the place. But this is an identity that is a weaponized identity against Israel, in Israel's point of view. And you can see the logic from the Palestinian point of view as well. We can go into it another time, but absolutely fascinating, the stuff we've uncovered. It's really interesting. But there's a deeper thing here going on, as we mentioned with the West Bank idea with Judea and Samaria, this kind of masking of Jewish linkage to the land, because just as the Romans... So after the Romans crushed the Jews, they renamed the land from Judea to Syria, Palestinia. And even Jerusalem, they called it Aelia Capitolina.
Alias Capitolina. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, so for them, the word actually carries a legacy of erasing Jewish identity. And its modern use can feel like a continuation of that. And as we said, actually the spirit of that erasure, in just using that name, is driving anti-Israel sentiment around the world. And it's really interesting to see that dynamic play out. It's spiritual. It's something, this kind of masking over as a weapon is interesting. So we can...
Yeah, carry on. This is interesting.
Okay. So there's also the argument that in the late Ottoman and British periods, Arab migration came into the area because there was a lot of economic opportunities at that time created by Jewish development. So there was quite an influx into the area. Basically, the population isn't kind of like, it wasn't a fixed or singular national identity as it's often presented. It's something fairly new, and its population base. Yes, there are realities where, yes, they were living there for generations and generations and generations, spanning back hundreds, thousands of years, whatever. Don't know the timescales, but there was a lot of immigration into the area, and it's great. They got jobs. They built up the area alongside the Jewish people. So anyway, put it all together, and the term Palestinian doesn't land as neutral. It lands as loaded in the minds of the Israelis, and it lands as strategic. And in their view, it has been incredibly effective. And even if you go back in history, as we said, it's been effective in that masking kind of effect that causes something almost spiritual to happen, similar to what happened with the Romans, the sentiment at least. I mean, they're in the land, but the sentiment is get out of the land, That's the bottom line that they're seeing play out on the international stage. And there's a certain phrase that says it all to them. So there we are. That's our conversations with the locals there, and a little bit of digging. So I feel it was important to pause at that moment, yeah? And for the sake of clarity and flow, we're going to continue using the word Palestinian, but, that's the background. So what were we talking about? Annexing the West Bank and it being suicide. Do you want to carry on? I'm going to have some water.
Okay, yeah. I think you need some after that. So it's important to get that across, yeah, while we think of it. So it's about demographics. It's about the millions of people. And if Israel annexes the territory and grants full Israeli citizenship, because they would have to do that, with the voting rights, healthcare, as we talked about with Gaza as well, to all those Palestinians, the Jewish population is actually going to become a minority. And that loses Israel's fundamental identity, the purpose that they were given that land for, as a Jewish state, after the horrors of the Holocaust, the pogroms, the journey they've had through life in the diaspora. So now it becomes a binational state, which many fear would lead to civil war. But if they annex the land but don't grant, say, citizenship to the Palestinians, then they lose their democratic character entirely. They officially cement a system where actually two peoples live on the same land under two different sets of laws permanently. They would be called an apartheid state, like an actual apartheid state. Because at that point, the international sanctions would be immediate and they'd likely collapse the economy. So if you withdraw, you lose your security and risk physical destruction. If you annex with citizenship, you lose your Jewish identity, which is the whole purpose of them living there in the first place. And if you annex it without citizenship rights, you lose your democracy and then you lose your economy. So literally there's no clean, safe option. So faced with this impossible I was going to say dilemma, trilemma.
That's a really good term.
Israel.
Trilemma. Not a good term, but very appropriate here. Yeah. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah. So Israeli successive leaderships chose the messy, the agonizing middle path, the permanent temporary status. They maintain overriding military control of the territory to ensure security, prevent rockets and militarization. They don't formally annex the territory to preserve the demographic balance and the illusion of a future peace process. And they manage the situation imperfectly, day by day. And this is agonizing, ambiguous middle ground. It's driven by these competing existential fears. And it is fertile soil that allowed the deeply controversial, the highly contested expansion of Israeli settlements to take root and complicate the map even further. I'm not going to go into,
Sometimes we need to just stop. We would go on for hours if we continued. And to be honest, why we're holding back on that is because we haven't got to the bottom of the settlements idea. And even the word settlements is a raw nerve here. So yeah, that's kind of one of the big reasons why we're not talking about it too much.
Yeah. This is a system born of fear with no clean resolution in sight at all. Like it's a never-ending story.